few years ago. Morning. The railroad was important here, even as a passenger railroad, towards the middle of the 20th century. And people would use that, as well as it's interesting where it crosses the river here. It reminds us that for most people during a significant part of this time, the railroad and the river were the primary ways of going to and from New Bern. Not the automobile or even the carriage. These were easier ways of travel, and they worked together. In fact, many of the boats that left from the port here in New Bern and went down the river and went north were run by the old Dominion railways. So railroads often worked in conjunction with shipping companies and ferries. But the waterways, and then eventually after 1858, the railway, were tremendously important in the everyday life of the city. As the trains come through the town, of course today it's a different sound from what it would have been during much of its history, because you have diesel engines that have a completely different sound, but the train whistles are still wonderful. Even from my home, late at night, I often hear the train whistles as they're crossing, particularly as they're crossing either this bridge or the Neuse River Bridge, and it's a wonderful sound. It's an absolutely wonderful sound in the middle of the night or any time of day. Those sounds and the rhythm. People are often surprised when a railroad runs right through the middle of town. They're particularly surprised if they're trying to get from point A to point B and the railroad cuts them off. But growing up in New Bern, it was just part of the rhythm of the town. Of course the train came through the middle of the town. When we were little boys, of course, we loved to try to put a penny on the tracks. And then if the train passed and the penny stayed on the tracks, then you had a penny that was about the size of a pound cake or a pancake, I should say, after the train passed. But of course, as you go further and up near the old depot in that area, just after 1858, they actually had built a very large roundhouse and repair facilities, and the railroad was a major employer in New Bern, one of the most important employers in New Bern during the period just before and following the Civil War. Today, as we look at the trestle, of course, importantly, there is steel, there is still some wood. There's relatively little that remains from the first trestle, although there is a bit. And we can walk over and see clear evidence of some construction that dates from the 1858 opening of the bridge, and actually continues to serve today as part of the foundation. The brick construction just at the riverbank, there's actually some brick and some granite there, and all of that was constructed in the original trestle, which opened in 1858. And it continues to be a support element for this bridge. Things were well built and built to stay, and that brick and granite construction continues to carry the weight of these heavy trains that pass. When the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad was organized in 1854, it had capital stock of $1,600,000, which was huge, of course, in the 1850s. So this was a tremendously important project for New Bern. That original board of directors included names that many people would recognize, people like John D. Whitford and Edward R. Stanley, R.N. Taylor, Alonzo Jerkins, Frederick Latham, William Moore, George Green, George Stevenson. These were people who played a major role in bringing to New Bern a very, very, very significant project that would dramatically affect the history of the town. Because of this railroad, of course, that New Bern became a target for Northern troops and was, in March of 1862, occupied. Well, Harry, I know this is one of your favorite parts of the battlefield. We're heading down towards Bowen's Branch, and why do you particularly like this view down here?
Well, this gives us a view of the railroad where the main part of the battle came. The Union came up from Slocum's Creek the night of the 14th, or 13th, and then the battle on the morning of the 14th. And this is the area they came up through. It's an area that's pristine. It's about what it would have been like in 1862. Nelson, that culvert that you see over there is original to 1858. Yeah. Normally, the railroad at that time would have been down to the top of that culvert. We think over the 150 years that they've completely raised the trackage, probably to level it out. I think that's a real good spot if you want to look at what the railroad was like back in those days.
Well, it is a fascinating spot. I mean, and to think of the events that occurred right here, and that we're standing where they occurred, dramatic events that changed the whole course of history of the war. Well, Harry, Steve Schaefer, another one of our great battlefield guides and good friend of yours and mine, is out here with us today, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the strategic importance of the railroad and tactical importance for the battle. Steve, tell us a little about the importance of this railroad.
Well, here I stand on the tracks above the culvert built during the period of its construction of the railroad, 1854 to 1858, which passes Bowen's Branch or creek flowing westward to Bryce's Creek, more than a mile distant from this point. This is where the punch through was made. This is where the Federal forces had already flanked the line and were fighting their way into the Confederate redans. It was up here at this overlook to my left, about 200 yards away, that the 21st Massachusetts Infantry Regiment first realized that there were men in entrenchments or redans in front of them across on the other side of the Bowen's Branch on hillocks. The Union force came down this railroad because it was really along with the old Beaufort Road west of here, or east of here, the only two access points into the area. Those forces came in through here. They met up with the militia, probably 250 men, if that, commanded by a Colonel H.J.B. Clark, who were not well trained, inexperienced, probably poorly led, and were fighting with squirrel rifles and shotguns. Now, these railroads were critical force multipliers to the Confederate war effort as they carried men, food, and material north to the battlefields in Virginia. Now, this section of the railroad became an important avenue of approach through this swampy, undulating terrain by which the Federal forces would be supported by the Navy flotilla on the Neuse River about 1 mile from here. And it was by mounting that flank attack that the Union forces thought that they could come around the right flank of the Confederates at this point down here and thereby gain control, punching through this hole. Now, they had intelligence about the whole line, the Fort Thompson line, Fort Thompson hard on the Neuse River, extending all the way over to this railway that it terminated there at the railroad about 400 yards from here. They had to move that line, the Fort Thompson line, about 400 yards in this direction because they could not put the line in the swamp that's on the west side of the railroad. So they came down here 400 yards and established a line here and of Rodans on the other side of Bullen's Branch. Confederates had burned the railroad bridge and they got across. They burned the bridge, Federals were not able to get across. The Federals, then got on boats supplied from the Navy flotilla and went across. And it was shortly then that the Federals moved in, occupied the city of New Bern for the duration of the war. Today, the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad track is slightly higher in places to accommodate modern railway traffic equipment. The rail bed is pretty much as it was when first operational in 1858, extending 97.1 miles from the port at Morehead City north to Goldsboro, and there to connect with a nexus of 3 other railroads, the North Carolina, the Wilmington, Charlotte, and Rutherford, and the Wilmington and Weldon railroads. Interestingly, the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, when it was opened in 1840, running from Wilmington, the state's largest port, to Weldon, was the longest railroad at 161.5 miles. And it was the longest railroad in the world.
Significant parts of the battle, and of course the battlefield, are right here at Bullen's Branch.
That's right.
Harry is a recent recipient of the Longleaf Pine and the Order of the Longleaf Pine given by the governor, in part for all the work he's done here at the battlefield, but also so many other contributions that he's made to the recording of the history of this area. So Harry, I'm thrilled to walk out here with you, but especially thrilled to be able to thank you for all that you've done.
Well, thank you, Nelson.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the NEWBERNIAN. We've come a few blocks north on the train tracks of the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad, and we're standing next to this wonderful old depot that was built in 1910. During our 300th anniversary, we dedicated a number of wonderful new additions to our city, and the same was true for the 200th anniversary in 1910. Thanks to the efforts of some wonderful preservationists who have worked on this project for years, we're on the edge of preservation efforts that will bring this depot back to life. And in a future episode, we will explore those efforts and what this restored depot will mean to our city in the future.